From high atop the city of Philadelphia on the 52nd floor of the BNY Mellon Bank Center and the Content Club studio in the Pyramid Club of Philadelphia, this is Storytelling with a Purpose. I'm your host, Jim DeLorenzo, the principal of Jim DeLorenzo Public Relations. And through this show, I want to illustrate how storytelling with a purpose is integral to my lifelong vocation, storytelling in public relations, with conversations that highlight best practices, tactics, and strategies behind the process, how storytelling works in a professional setting, what goes into it, and how it can move the listener, the viewer, or the reader to some action. An interesting life can lead to many interesting stories, which is why I wanted to have as my guest today Sam Katz and have him share his experiences. Sam is well known in Philadelphia, having run for mayor and governor, leading a variety of civic and nonprofit organizations, and expressing his views on issues that challenge the city and the region. In 2008, Sam and his son, Phil Katz, founded History Making Productions, an award-winning full-service documentary film company based in Philadelphia. Over the past 2 decades, History Making Productions has conducted over 400 interviews with hundreds of scholars in history, the social sciences, and hard sciences on various aspects of Philadelphia history, architecture, culture, economy, and religion. And Sam, I know how much storytelling plays in your career, and I'm grateful for your time today on this
Thank you, Jim.
episode.
It's great to be here and be with you.
We were talking before we started rolling tape here, how storytelling has been a big part of your career, both in politics and in business, and now as a filmmaker. You said something very interesting about the role storytelling played in your political and civic career. Could you share that a little bit of that with me as far as how you approached an audience with a hot topic, if you will?
Well, in politics, of course, I was trying to persuade. And with civic affairs or business, I was trying to persuade.
Yeah.
So in my municipal finance, public finance career, I was constantly called upon to manage and help transact large municipal financings for public agencies and authorities and cities and states, where at the end of the process, a decision to be made by the policymakers required some kind of an explanation. And what is an explanation if it's not a good story?
Right.
In running for public office virtually every night, between 5 and 10 locations, I got my few minutes to say why you should vote for me. And all of that, I think, has contributed to the attention to detail that as a producer and occasionally as a director, I try to give to documentary filmmaking, which is the ultimate form of storytelling, because you can write a book or an article, you can do a podcast, but when you have to do all of those things in one piece of content, which includes visuals and music, sound design, storytelling, experts, reenactments, all of those elements that would make someone want to watch. And so in particular, with respect to our series on the history of Philadelphia, our distribution partner, if you will, was 6ABC.
Okay.
And they would take Wheel of Fortune off at 7:30 at night and put on a half-hour segment of Philadelphia, the Great Experiment. Well, you can only imagine you're sitting in front of your TV waiting for Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
A voiceover comes on to tell you, tonight we will not be broadcasting Wheel of Fortune. So I always thought, well, we have 90 seconds before people will decide to change the channel. So if we don't deliver oomph right off the bat, which makes the nature of those documentaries very different from a PBS-style documentary, which I admire very much. But the PBS audience is there by choice. The 6ABC audience is waiting for Wheel of Fortune.
Right. So you're kind of, you have to tailor that message and that story to that particular audience.
But the difference, of course, is that at 7:30 at night, the size of the audience on 6ABC versus the size of the audience on a public television station.
It's amazing.
We're not talking about the same universe.
Yeah.
So when you make a documentary series about the city of Philadelphia for Philadelphians, You want as many of them as possible to be watching. 6ABC turned out to be a great partner for that purpose.
Sure. That's wonderful. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that beforehand, about having a story, finding a story that people will find entertaining or interesting or amusing or compelling, and then finding the right audience for that story. And that's a great part of storytelling that people sometimes overlook, especially in the PR and marketing side. We tend to think, oh, this is going to be a great story for everybody. But you have to really target your audience. You have to really target your messaging, don't you?
Well, and I would say if the discipline of a political campaign teaches you anything, you have to be able to count to 50.1%. Now, I've never been able to do that, but the idea is to win.
Right.
So when you think about running for public office, you have to think, how am I going to win? Who is the constituency? What are the messages that will enable me to put a coalition of voters together to win? So I have the same view about media. If I'm thinking about something, the first thing I'm thinking about is audience. And great ideas, great stories, and even great opportunities have become available to me in which I could not answer the question, who wants to watch it?
Sure.
And if I can't answer that question, somebody else needs to make that movie.
Right. Or someone else needs to make that movie, or somebody has to rewrite that story till we get to the point where it is interest to not only you, but to a potential audience.
So, for me, I like to watch, for example, I watch a lot of what Ken Burns produces. But I don't necessarily watch all 10 two-hour episodes.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it takes a certain kind of audience who is intellectually stimulated to a point where they'll stay with, the Civil War as an example, which is probably one of his most prominent productions. I think it was 6 two-hour episodes. I could be wrong. But a lot of that requires an audience that has the ability to sit still for 2 hours.
Right.
To do it at 8 o'clock at night, 4 nights in a row.
Yep.
That's not the way people consume media anymore.
No.
So
that ship has sailed, unfortunately.
And so for that reason, the digital opportunities that technology has afforded content producers, whether it's a podcast or a documentary or even a feature film, has changed the whole way people interact with audiences and how to find an audience. Because a lot of platforms have a very specialized audience. And sometimes I think it's important, just like with politics, to have a clear strategy about messaging and communication and audience acquisition. And when people ask me what business I'm in, well, of course, I'm in the filmmaking business, but I'm in the audience acquisition business.
Okay, that's a great way to describe it.
And that's what if I can make a great movie and nobody watched it, it doesn't matter to me that it was great.
Sure.
It's really about, did anybody like it? Did they see it? What kind of feedback did I get? What kind of response does it generate? Those are the things that matter.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to describe it, because even when you're running a political campaign, you want to win the election, but you want to win over the voters. So you're telling a story that will influence them and will attract them and attract other people to the story, to your candidacy, or finding a story that work with a certain audience and making sure that audience is aware of it and can find it.
I think finding the story is half the battle, but it is maybe the most important half.
Sure.
It's the first half. So even as a Republican candidate for office in a Democratic city, persuading people that a Republican could beat a Democrat was, a hill to climb.
Sure.
And I didn't do it the first time I ran. Of course, I ran in a primary against Frank Rizzo and Ron Castile, but I made enough headway to be taken seriously in subsequent elections.
Right.
And that's the step that you have to take. So I can take that person seriously. And so with filmmaking, it's, what are you doing? You're the business guy who ran for office, and now you're a documentary filmmaker?
Sure.
What world are you coming from? And so for the first few years, I think a lot of people were thinking, what's he up to? Why is he doing this? What's his motivation for doing this? And the truth is, I just wanted to do something aside from trying to become wealthy and powerful.
Okay.
So I really wanted to make a dent in the creative side of my brain.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to get rich at what I do, but I do like telling a good story, and I do like meeting people and learning their stories.
It's hard to get rich when you're in a one-man service business.
Well, that's true too.
Although if you can charge enough. But
Well, I don't get there.
yeah.
One of the things I find interesting about the role storytelling plays for you is it also applies to, you've mentioned politics, you've mentioned civic projects and public projects, but it also involves investing, and involves influencing and persuading people to invest in a project or to invest in a business. And that's one of the most overlooked things, I think, in storytelling is that, and I mentioned professional setting or business setting, how do you tell stories that make people interested in what you're selling, what you're building, what you're offering. And when you find those story elements, like how much research goes into your messaging?
So I think with any product, anything, it isn't about the person who's selling it. It's the person who we hope is buying it.
Okay.
And what's the value proposition for you? Now, if you're selling investment in anything, a film, a business, your objective is to convince them that they're going to get a return on
Right.
their investment. If you're raising philanthropy to make documentary films, there's no return. There's no sale.
Right.
And there certainly isn't anybody who's making a lot of money making documentaries. Michael Moore made a lot of money, and I don't even think that Ken's company makes a lot of money. So the value proposition is, if I'm working with Jennifer Lin on Beethoven in Beijing,
Right.
the value there is, look at what the Philadelphia Orchestra did historically and how this advances the image of our city. And don't you want to be part of that? And here's an opportunity for you to do
Okay.
that. In the story of Detroit's bankruptcy, a group of very powerful foundations came to the rescue of the city by funding the transfer of the ownership of the Detroit Institute of Arts, the art museum of the city, which was owned by the city and therefore was an asset on the balance sheet of the city that
Okay.
could have been divested, liquidated or whatever, and made, not liquefied, but
We hope not
liquidated,
liquefied.
liquidated to pay creditors. And so my thesis going in was that those same foundations that came to the rescue of Detroit and whose $350 million philanthropic contributions helped to get the city out of bankruptcy would want that story to be told.
Sure. It's a natural.
The first foundation I went to would have been the last one I went to if he had said no,
Okay.
because they were either all in it or none of them were going to
Right.
be in it. I had a thesis when I started History Making Productions that a bunch of foundations in Philadelphia would be on board 100% with what I was doing. And it turned out none of them were.
That's interesting.
Well, we won't get into that.
Yeah.
But the main problem then became, well, am I going to just quit because a bunch of people aren't voting for me?
Sure.
No, I'm not. And so instead I pivoted to family offices and
Okay.
private philanthropists
Sure.
and people who had some interest either in their art collection or the boards they served on that connected to the history of Philadelphia. And that's how History Making Productions got launched. We never got anything from those other foundations.
That's interesting.
Although I think that's about to change.
Sure.
But it's changing at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that they see what you can do, they're more interested in getting involved.
Well, I think it's also fair to say that the project about the history of Philadelphia that we are now culminating in a long-form documentary series, not made for half-hour time slots,
Okay.
is the end of a 15-year project,
Right.
not the beginning.
Right.
And so the capital requirements to finish are a whole lot different today than they were 15 years ago.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's interesting that, and again, we talk about a through line for a story. The through line for that story is that you started with this project and this is where it's taken you along the way, and now you're at this end point with this long-form documentary as opposed to the segmented documentary. But also, any storytelling medium, any storytelling opportunity, it has to be a compelling story from beginning to end. And sometimes these things just peter out.
Well, Philadelphia doesn't peter out. This is the film that we're making now, the recut, if you will, not only is a long-form documentary, but it utilizes the development of the team's skills over 15 years. So if you watch the very first episode that we made, which, by the way, I can't do because it makes me ill, and watch the last one we made, you're looking at a gigantic change in the quality of production values, the questioning, the nature of the storytelling.
So it evolved over time.
So this was really, okay, we got to go back and make it all sort of at the same level.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing in connection with that project. I'm working on another series now on Philadelphia's musical history in the 20th century. And the characters who dominate the story are some of the most interesting people in the city's history, its cultural history.
Sure.
And the idea that the film would also play music, not as a underneath kind of a thing, but that it would, dissolve to a particular piece of gospel or classical or jazz or popular, not to mention all the technology when you think about Philadelphia and the Victor Talking Machine Company and
Sure.
Victrola. The emergence of radio, not invented here, but certainly was a big deal here. American Bandstand, Sigma Sound. There's just a lot of things that happened in the musical history of the city that is behind the scenes that helped make Philadelphia such a musical place. So those are the storytelling is always the hardest part of it, and trying to tell a lot of stories in the same episode, in which really, Leopold Stokowski, who was the concert master of the Philadelphia Orchestra,
Sure.
probably never met Charles Albert Tinley, who was the pastor of the Tinley Temple.
Yep.
But both of them are giants in the field of music.
Yeah.
And they operated 7 blocks away from each other.
It's not that far from, but they never crossed paths really, probably.
As it turns out, Tinley's daughter, Emmeline, who was also a great voice, grew up with Marian Anderson, who's another character in the story. So we have these personal relationships that will allow us to segue into other parts of the story.
Amazing. I love that aspect of the connections. And there used to be a documentary series on PBS many, many moons ago called Connections. And he would just take one point and he would wander through all these different inventions or events, and he would come out at the end with, this is how what I started with at the beginning connects to where I am now. And it's fascinating to me to make those connections in any storytelling medium.
It is, and sometimes it isn't anything that you expect.
Yeah.
And usually the unexpected is what causes the product to be better than you envisioned. So, even going back to the Detroit story, when I first met with the man who became what became known as the emergency manager, basically a state takeover of Detroit's finances, if I had left his office with him saying, I'm not interested, end of story. I mean, I couldn't do this without the guy who ran the bankruptcy. There's an advantage at some point in life to use the experiences you've had to build your own case.
Right.
And of course, we all see in our proposals and our outreach, here's what I've done. Let me show you my product. Let me show you the things that I've done. So I think that's very much part of the corporate storytelling, the brand storytelling. There was a great campaign in New York in the 1970s for governor of New York between a guy who ran off-track betting and a congressman from Brooklyn. And the congressman from Brooklyn's TV ads, who was trying to criticize the OTB guy, off-track betting guy, before they tell you what they're going to do, make them show you what they've done. And
I love that.
Me too. That has been I don't know why I remembered that, but that was 1974.
Wow.
And I have always made that a kind of a front post for how I approach things.
That's a great way to do that. A great way to get people to listen to you. Yeah.
Well,
And
But you know, they won't listen to you if they're not convinced that you have anything to tell them.
right. But if you start something like that is kind of like, as you said, it's unexpected. That's a great way to.
Yeah.
I've always found fun in storytelling when it's something that I investigate or something that I dig into, and I find something that I wasn't expecting, as you mentioned. What are some of the things that you've been finding in your storytelling with the documentaries? Maybe one example of, you mentioned the Tinley Temple, but are there other areas that you've said, oh boy, I never thought of that?
Well, I don't want to take credit for never thinking of it, because I may not even have thought of it when it hit me in the face. But I'm doing another doc, which is pretty far down the road, with Ray Didinger.
Okay.
Ray, of course, is Philadelphia's most prominent and well-respected sports journalist. I think he has no peers. And, of course, he retired recently, so we don't see him as often on after Eagles games, but he still sits in front of the TV with his pad. And he wrote a play called Tommy and Me about his lifelong relationship with wide receiver Tommy McDonald, who played for the first Eagles championship team in 1960. And there are 4 actors in the play. There's a young Ray Didinger and an old Ray Didinger, and a young Tommy McDonald and an old Tommy McDonald. And I was invited to join the post theatrical production talkback.
Sure.
Somebody said, "Are you going to make a movie?" And Ray looked down at me. I was at the end of the bro, and I said, "Yeah, let's make a movie." And the thing I love about the play is it's really a warm-hearted story of a love affair between 2 men, not sexual, but this just their pleasure and enjoyment and life's journey to get to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So I went out to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and Tommy McDonald gave the most outrageous speech in the history of enshrinement at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He came out on the stage with a boombox and played "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees. He took his statue and threw it up in the air and caught it, and then leaned into the microphone and said, "I still have good hands." And he chest bumped with the other inductees, all of whom were huge men. And the whole place just exploded in laughter. And they've never had and never will have a Hall of Fame speech like that. So I went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, did a little research, and found a woman who had been Tommy McDonald's teenager escort. And, the parade had a queen, and
Sure.
the queen had a court, and every enshrinee was accompanied
By
up onto the stage to get their gold jackets by one of these young women. She's now not as young, but still and she described the most exciting experience in her life was with being with Tommy McDonald that week, going to places and events. And at the moment that he was to go on stage and get his gold jacket, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her up onto the stage. And she has a photograph that was on the front page of the Canton Repository. So when you do things like that, and you're sitting in front of a person and they tell you a story that you had no idea, and this of course will be in the movie.
Sure.
Those are the great moments in which your capacity to enhance the storytelling, to make it more human, more personal, more relevant, and more touchable. Those are the great moments for me, and that was a great moment. The fact that I even found her, and that she agreed to come back and do this was pretty amazing.
That's serendipity, is what that is.
Even Ray Didinger was shocked that I was able to find her.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, it was.
I love that. That's that's the unexpected. That's the happy accident that makes it worthwhile.
That was a happy accident.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you, Sam, for sharing that with me. I think that's a great story, and I'm looking forward to that and the cultural history of Philadelphia in the 20th century, and the fulfillment of the Great Experiment documentary. Are there other stories that you think might be coming coming up in the near future? Are there other things that you're looking at and saying, boy, I really want to do something about that? Or is there something that's happening now that you say, I should do something about that?
Well, if my wife were to hear the answer to that question in the affirmative, she would hit me on the head with a frying pan. I have some other things that I'm working on. Most prominently, I'm working with Comcast Spectacor on the fight over a new arena. The idea that Philadelphia needs a new arena is pretty much beyond me. So I have other things. There's a podcast that I'm working on, which is an outgrowth of the film on the bankruptcy of Detroit, about the fiscal crises and bankruptcies of about 10 other places across the country, including New York City in the 1970s, Cleveland in the late 70s, Puerto Rico, which of course is going through a bankruptcy, Stockton, California, Jefferson County, Alabama, Detroit. So the podcast has a working title, Till Debt Do Us Part, and we'll see whether I can pull that off. I believe I'll pull off the pilot episode.
Sure.
And hopefully I'll be able to use that to find the money to make 9 more episodes. But I'm pretty busy, and I'm finding a lot of fulfillment in the things that I do. And I keep my fingers at least close to the civic and political world, but not to the extent that they once were.
Okay. And right now you're experimenting with a podcast. You've done feature films. You've done documentary films.
No feature films.
I mean, documentary features. I should
Documentary.
say. Yeah. I apologize.
I get scared when people talk to me about feature films. I have no idea how you would do that.
But what has been your favorite mode of storytelling of late?
Well, I would say that the film we did on the bankruptcy of Detroit was the best film. Look, I spent almost 30 years in municipal and project finance, even longer in some way involved in politics.
Right.
And I think that all of that experience is reflected in the bankruptcy. It's called Gradually, Then Suddenly, The Bankruptcy of Detroit. It will be released in July of 2024. It's the best thing I've ever done. I mean, it's municipal finance, it's politics, it's filmmaking, it's storytelling, all in the same package. And the challenge of telling a story about a municipal bankruptcy, constantly thinking about how do I acquire an audience for this, made it essential that we humanize the story and constantly make it a reminder of what it looks like when a city has no money and the things that it can't do for the people who pay taxes and who expect and need, in many cases, life-saving services. And so that I would say is, if I don't expect to ever do anything that well again.
Yeah. That's kind of a fulfillment of the promise of all the things and the experiences you've had.
Yes.
Is in that one package, if you will.
I think that would be my conclusion. I do have other things that I hope will be really good, maybe be as good, but I can't say that I've spent my life in music.
Right.
And that I'm now I've been a listener.
Yeah.
I like music, but I'm no expert in music. I was theoretically an expert in municipal finance.
Sure.
I never had any experiences with clients who went bankrupt. So, I think there's lots of things that I'm going to do, but I do not think I'm going to ever accomplish, and through a pandemic,
Sure.
The end of that project went through 2 years of every kind of challenge you can imagine, including, we shut down our studio because of the pandemic.
Sure.
So I feel like that's a crowning achievement. And I would say just in respect to that film, in 2021, while it was still in production, it was awarded the Ken Burns Prize for Film by the Library of Congress.
Oh, wow.
And that was in production. In other words, it wasn't finished.
Right.
It wasn't close to being finished. It wasn't finished until April of 2023. But in the summer of 2021, it was given this award. So I do think it's a crowning achievement. And if I don't ever do anything else, I will be very proud of that one.
Well, I hope you do many more things, and I look forward to future conversations with you. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, and I'm very happy that you were able to do this today. And I'm looking forward to the Till Death Do Us Part. I'm looking forward to the Gradually Then Suddenly, and I look forward to all your projects in the near future. And thank you again for taking some time with me today.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Have a great one.
And thank you all for paying attention to us today, and look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon.